All right. So, the uh the existential theory um doesn't just have one theorist. It's rooted in philosophy. So, you know, and it's in my mind, it's actually changed quite a bit over the years. So we're going to go over um a few different aspects of it. And the the thing with existential theory, and one of the reasons I'm not putting it on an exam for you, is that even though I incorporate techniques when I use existential theory, um, the theory itself does not have specific techniques because it's based in kind of a philosophical foundation. So rather than techniques, we talk with clients about subjects. So we might talk about meaning or maybe they don't feel fulfilled. Um, so one example, I just want to kind of give you an example of um, kind of a therapeutic issue that would be really good for existential therapy. Um, so when I had a private practice, um, I would get a lot of people, I would say between, 45 and 60. And they most of the individuals had worked uh, and they became successful in their work. Um, and they thought that, wow, I'm going to follow all of society's rules. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to maybe start my own business and I'm going to be successful. I'm going to have a nice house and a cool car and a nice retirement fund, whatever it is. And then I'll feel as though I've made it. But so many people get to that point and this feeling of peace and fulfillment is not there. They've worked half their lives. They followed all the rules in society and they don't find fulfillment. They don't find that peace or satisfaction or gratification that they expected in success. And that's because, you know, the success of society is very different than fulfillment. Um, and so, so they come to me because, they've been struggling with this, uh, and they're depressed. They're starting to feel anxious. They feel like uh, their life was a waste of energy up to that point. And, um, and the first thing they do is they give me their resume, basically. They tell me all of their successes. And I'm like, congratulations, how's that working for you? And they laugh because that's why they're there. And, you know, and that opens the door to talking about finding fulfillment in life, finding what's meaningful to them. And, I think that each of us gravitates towards theories, different theories. Like at the end of this class, you'll get to write a paper and choose a theory. And you're not going to write about the theory. You're going to write about a theory that fits you as a therapist, that might fit your personality, or it might fit the population that you want to work with. It might just resonate with you. So I think we all gravitate to different theories for different reasons. One of those reasons is because each and every one of us is still growing and we're still dealing with our own issues and we're still like I would call like years ago I would call myself a seeker. you know, like I didn't have all the answers, but I wanted to know. So I think that's kind of why I gravitated towards existentialism. It's because I was looking for answers in my own life. And, I think you will gravitate towards theories that you'll find helpful in your life. And, you know, so that just seems to be the way of it. Um, all right. So, um, I think that the first thing we should talk about is kind of how it's rooted in philosophy. And the earlier philosophers, I'm not really fond of personally. A lot of people are. That's fine. Um, but the focus was more on nihilism or nothingness and meaninglessness. And, you know, I was searching for meaning, so they didn't really resonate with me. With the later theories, that all changed, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, the early theorists, the early philosophers, Soren Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, uh, Jean-Paul Sartre, and then, Sartre was probably like the middle ground, and then getting into kind of the more I would call them modern. They were a long time ago, but um, Martin Buber and Paul Tillich. And that's when everything changed in existentialism because Martin Buber wrote a book called I and Thou. If he wrote it today, it would be called Me and You. And one of the lines in his book is that there is no me without a you. There is no I without a thou. And what he means by that is, yes, ultimately we might feel totally alone and we might experience that existential vacuum or that existential anxiety, that feeling of being alone in this world. And yet, becoming who we are, learning about ourselves, we can only do that through interaction with other human beings. And anytime we encounter another human being, that is, an interactive experience. And we both grow and change from that experience. Now, that's any human interaction. It might be positive, it might be negative. But when you think about it, if you place that human interaction in a therapeutic setting, it's very different because one of the things um, that I feel is very important is that, like, before like when I go to work at the hospital, I have a commute. And so I use that time in the car to kind of let go of maybe household stressors. Like last night, my refrigerator stopped working. And I'm like, what are we going to do with all this food? I'm like, I got to order a new refrigerator. They're so expensive, so, you know, kind of letting go of those stressors that happened before work. And then I also try to let go of things that I'm planning to do after work. Um, and so before I go in to run a group or talk with somebody individually, I simply remind myself to be present with that other human being. I don't want to be thinking about the past or the future. On a therapeutic level, if clients focus on the past, it can lead to depression because regrets occur in the past. If clients focus on the future, it leads to anxiety because the future hasn't happened yet. They're usually worried about the future, and that leads to anxiety. And beneath the anxiety is a fear of the unknown, of not succeeding, of something not working out, of something negative happening. whatever it might be. But if you're thinking about the past or you're thinking about the future, you're not in the present. Very few people focus in the present. How many times, have you been with somebody and really been present for them, even a loved one, you know? It's rare in today's society. And, I go out to eat, like my kid's favorite restaurant is like Red Robin. And so we go to Red Robin and I look at all these families. Some people are on a date, some people have kids. Every single one of them is looking at their phone rather than spending time with one another, interacting. And so, like, you got to institute those no electronics at the table. I want to have an actual conversation. The best time to have a conversation is over a meal, you know, breaking bread together. And, but one time, uh, Dr. Walsh and I did a presentation at a conference about the effect of technology on human interaction and being present for one another and on anxiety. And as everybody, like we didn't take their phones, but we asked that they put their phone in a basket in front of the room. And I put my phone in the basket in front of the room. But then in the beginning of the lecture, of the presentation, I had a friend of mine call my phone and it was just vibrating because everybody has different ringtones, but all the vibrations sound the same. So they didn't know whose phone was vibrating in the front of the room. And some people like wanted to get up and check their phone and and then we did kind of the Likert scale. What's your anxiety now that the phone is vibrating? And you know, so it was interesting how tied we are to technology or things that distract us from the people we're actually with. And so being present for one's client is really important. And they probably have not experienced that in their lives either. So, the other thing I like about existentialism is that all the other theories are valid. I use them all the time. There's no theory that I don't use. But I use like, CBT and REBT for irrational thoughts. Everybody has irrational thoughts in their lives. I use like Freud when we talk about defense mechanisms or things like that. Adler, remember we talked about Gemeinschaftgefühl and, feeling inferior. So everyone has advantages, but there's not a lot of theories that really talk about deep, meaningful subjects in people's lives. So, yes, people have irrational thought processes, and we can help them with that. But what about going deeper than that? What about talking about your life's meaning and how to find fulfillment? And, you know, these these deeper questions. And and people don't feel as though they can talk about those deeper things with just anybody. It's not like, hey, let's go to the bar and talk about meaning, you know? So, although at a bar, it might often get to that point. Um, so bartenders probably counsel a lot of people in that area. So, yeah, that's another thing that I really like about existentialism. We can really talk about life. And you know, I think a lot of times when people are feeling unfulfilled or stuck, um, they need to talk about these things. So I think everything changed with the later philosophers. And uh, Yes, there may be meaninglessness, but it's our job to search for meaning in life. We create our own meaning. So it just takes it one step further, and that's the philosophy I like. Um, and then I just listed three psychologists, Viktor Frankl and Rollo May and Irvin Yalom. Irvin Yalom's still alive and writing books, and his son has taken over quite a bit and does a lot of speaking engagements. Um, so let's talk about each one of their backgrounds a little bit. Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite books, Man's Search for Meaning. And so uh born in Vienna, all right, so you know, and became a doctor, just like the other theorists. In 1930, got a PhD, so doctor in 1930, PhD in 49 from Vienna. So 1930 was before World War II. 1949 was after World War II. Uh, so Viktor Frankl was Jewish during World War II, and from 1942 to 45, he was a prisoner in multiple Nazi concentration camps, and including Auschwitz and Dachau. And very few people survived those camps. In fact, he was one of the lone survivors in his family. And I think that one thing I liked about his book is that the first half talks about his experience, and the second half talks about his theory. So you can see how a lot of his theory comes from his experiences. So his whole time when he was in those concentration camps, he was formulating this theory. And, he called his theory logotherapy, or logo means word, and, therapy. So healing through speaking, talk therapy. Um, and, but he was also kind of coming up with the idea of what he would write in this book. So when he was rescued and released in 1945, 46, look at how quickly he was able to write that book and talk about his experiences. And one of the things he mentioned is that, um, people have to have some sort of meaning or meaningful endeavor, something that they're working towards that they think will help others or be meaningful. And he noticed that that's one of the things that kept him going during the worst times in the concentration camps is, thinking about this, wanting to share it with other people. My amazement is found that he can come up with such a positive theory in the midst of horror. Um, but yeah, it helped to keep him going. And he found that people who did not have meaning often gave up and did not survive that experience. Um, yeah, so it's a short read. You could probably read it in a couple days, just a little paperback. You can find it for $1 plus $3.99 shipping on Amazon. $5. $5 makes you holler. Yeah.
I read the first half of that book. The second half was a little bit hard when it got into like the theory part of it. I intend to finish it at some point, but in the book, like in the first half of it, when he's talking about his experience, didn't he say like he could tell when people lost their meaning and could predict like the day they were gonna die? I was like, wow, I couldn't imagine being able to pinpoint someone's death just by like how they were appearing and being able to even recognize someone else's experience and suffering, while I would be in the midst of that myself and just kind of opening up my world to theirs a little bit. And I thought that was so wild.
Yeah, so I think one of the things when he's talking about that is that he wants to help others to find meaning in their lives. I think that's one of the goals of this theory. So when he witnessed people with a lack of meaning who were basically giving up, I think he found that horribly sad and a loss. And I think part of his theory is helping others to find meaning, whatever that meaning is in life. And it's different for everybody.
What was he working on before he came into the camper? He said like they took his papers, like his lifelong work, and he was writing them down on like little
Yeah,
fragments of things.
I
What's
think he
that?
was starting this process.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it carried through, and then he was able to just write it really quickly when he was released.
Oh, wow. I wonder what that theory would look like without that experience, though. Like how it would have changed.
Um, Probably a little more theoretical than experiential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because honestly, what attracts people to that book is reading about his experiences, but then they keep going and they read the theory. Yeah. Rollo May, 1909, 1994, which is fairly recent, 1994. 1994 is when I graduated with my master's from counseling. Um, so yeah, just like yesterday. Uh, he lived in Ohio, Michigan. There's a lot of different reports, in fact, and it's not just reports from other people, it's his own reports about how he grew up. So I think depending on where he was in his life, either he had a great supportive childhood or he struggled. So depending on how he was feeling when asked. Um, and you know, uh, he himself experienced two failed marriages and but one interesting thing, so we got Viktor Frankl. He experienced the horrors of concentration camps and losing his entire family. And, and then we talked about Adler, almost dying when he was a child and then losing his little brother. And, Rollo May, um, you know, in his youth, he studied Greek civilization and later studied theology at Union Theological Seminary. And then he moved to Vienna and he studied with Adler. And, but here's the thing. While working on his doctorate, he suffered from tuberculosis for 2 years. And at that time, tuberculosis was, you know, very touch and go. He definitely sensed his own mortality. He could have died. And while he was, recuperating, um, you know, he started reading Freud and Kierkegaard and Tillich. Um, so the interesting thing, so he studied at Union Theological Seminary. That's a Presbyterian seminary in New York City connected with Columbia University. And Tillich taught at that university. And I looked it up. Tillich didn't teach there the same time he went there. But the whole kind of Tillich existential philosophy mixed with spirituality. Um, he wrote a series of books called The Courage to Be. Um, and what he means by that is it takes courage to live an authentic life, to be who you were meant to be the real you, to show the world the real you. Um, and so, yeah, Tillich was, you know, he taught there, but, you know, he wasn't there at the exact same time, but he read Tillich. Um, so Rollo May, um, Wrote a couple famous books, The Meaning of Anxiety and Love and Will, 1950, 1969. Um, yeah. And Irvin Yalom continues to write. A lot of students read his books, The Gift of Therapy, Staring at the Sun. Students like his books because his books are about his experiences with clients. And um, yeah, so it's kind of like, oh, what's it like, to be a therapist? And that's what he's sharing with you. I wouldn't do some of the things that he did or said, but, you know, he started a long time before I did. Yeah, so those are kind of the primary uh, existential psychologists. Um, and I think the other thing I want to say is that, you know, for me, a big part of existentialism is phenomenology. So a phenomena is uh, something that occurs, an experience. And, I think that uh, an added aspect of that experience is experience of other. And so, what it really stresses in my mind is empathy, putting yourselves in the shoes of somebody else so that you can have the greatest empathy possible to better understand their subjective reality of the world and the feelings that are associated with that, and so that you can literally feel them as well. Now, you'll never be able to experience that fully. You didn't go through it. But whenever I'm with a client, I want to, you know, phenomenologically place myself in their shoes and try to have enough empathy that I can kind of experience just a little bit of what they have experienced emotionally. Um, People always say, oh, well, won't you get burnt out doing that? So we have to use what's called a theory of detachment, and it's a Buddhist concept. Um, but what it is, it's called detachment, but it's almost like immersion. So I want to fully experience the emotions, like if somebody shares grief and loss with me or abuse or something else. I'm going to allow myself to empathize and experience those emotions fully. But I'm not going to hold on to them. They're not mine. I didn't actually experience that. So I don't have to hold on to those emotions. I'm going to experience them fully. I'm going to detach a little in my mind. I'm going to examine those emotions. And then I'm going to let them flow through me and let them go. And that's how you don't get burnt out when you have a lot of empathy with a client. You don't have to take all of those emotions home with you in order to have empathy. So, um, some of the things that existentialism talks about is like, what's it really mean to be human, you know, with all of our imperfections? And it's kind of like a paradox, perfect and yet imperfect at the same time. A lot of people have compared Buddhism with existentialism because, just the concept of the paradox in humanity's imperfection and perfection is like, you know, uh, that samurai that searched his entire life for the perfect cherry blossom. And when he was dying and the wind blew and hundreds of cherry blossoms covered him, and he looked in the air and he spent his whole life looking for the perfect one, but he finally realized that they were all perfect. in and of themselves with all of their imperfections. So it's a paradox. Trying to understand the human experience. And parts of the human experience are different and unique for every human being. And yet there are themes that run through humanity that everybody touches upon in one way or another: love, loss, struggle, success. Death is one of the key aspects of existential theory. And everybody thinks, oh, that's so morbid, that's so depressing. But if we think about it, if there was no death, nobody'd be in a hurry to do anything. Death gives us motivation to truly live. So death might have a purpose to live to our fullest. Um, it's like that saying, a monk wakes up and goes onto his porch and a little bird flies down and sits on his shoulder and whispers into his ear, "This is the last day of your life. How would you live that life differently? How would you spend that day?" And some people might say, well, I'm going to make this the best day possible. But in reality, the answer is that every day is perfect. So, you have a lot of paradoxes. Um, there's the existential vacuum. Everybody kind of feels at one point in their lives that they're totally alone. And yet, once they kind of move through that aloneness and connect with others in a more personal way, they realize that, as Buber said, there's no me without a you. I may be alone, but, you know, I don't really exist in a vacuum. Um, Meaning can be found in life, the process, the journey, rather than the end product. You've all read memes on Facebook or Instagram, you know, uh, life isn't, where you end up. It's the journey getting there, you know. Um, and I kind of like the metaphor of, you know, a dance, that life is a dance. If you're dancing with somebody, um, you know, your goal is not for that song to end, not to finish the song, but to enjoy the dance. So, you know, um, finding meaning in meaninglessness, that's another paradox. Uh, let's see. So Martin Buber's I and Thou experience, um, he was Jewish and he um, had three different levels to that. And the first level of I and Thou would be our encounter or our experience with nature. And like an existential experience. So I'll share some of my existential experiences. It's hard to define an existential experience. One existential experience with nature was when I was young, I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13. Um, it was a different life back then. My parents would just, let me go camping with a friend for weeks in the summer. Hey, that'll keep him out of trouble. So I'm alone in a camp. It had just rained and it was twilight, so I could still see, but a mist came in to the campground after the rain, and I couldn't really see very far, but it was still light out, and I heard footsteps. And at first I was really frightened. Is it a person? Is it a bear? What is it? And through the mist, I saw these huge antlers, and it was a giant deer. And I startled him as well, but I just was very still and watched him, and he watched me, and our eyes kind of made contact. And um, he calmed down. He's like, okay, this human's not going to hurt me. And not only did I feel a connection with that deer, but because of that connection with another living being, a wild animal, it also made me feel connected to all of nature. Not just, oh, I'm a human and I'm connected with nature, but I am part of nature. I'm no different than any other creature in nature. So it's different. It's not like I'm a human and I feel like I like nature. No, I'm just a part of nature. So that was that existential experience. Um, let's see, his second level of existential experience is I and thou with another human being. And, I guess this might be cliche, but um, every time I held one of my newborn children, um, I had kind of this existential experience where not only, wow, this is a totally new little creature, he hasn't experienced anything. They wrap their tiny little hands around one finger. And I think this is the closest I've gotten to, you know, I guess feeling selfless and knowing that I would kind of give up everything or make sacrifices for this other human being, that this human being was more important than me. And, it's kind of the miracle of everything. Um, but it's really about letting go of my ego and placing someone else totally before myself and having an unconditional sense of love and acceptance. So, no conditions. Um, yeah, so that's that existential experience. Um, let's see. The third one is um, you're the I and thou with something spiritual, a higher power. You may be an atheist, that's fine. It's still a belief system, though. Atheists might say, oh, I'm an atheist. I don't believe anything. Oh, no. You believe that, when I die, that's it. Existence ceases. And people can find comfort in that. But it's still a belief system. Um, but whatever you might be, doesn't really matter. But Buber, you know, he was Jewish, so he believed in a higher power. And let's see. So I've had a lot of different spiritual experiences. Um, a lot of times I've had those experiences with people who were dying. And, you know, uh, just being present and being there to witness their life and death and maybe having a few moments to talk with them or maybe going on that final journey in hospice over a few weeks with them. Um, the and then I've had my own spiritual kind of things going on. Um, Death. Sometimes death could lead to an existential experience or a near-death experience or something like that. One time I had like a 1966 Volkswagen Beetle, and it was my last year of undergrad. It was a beautiful spring day. I was driving on the back roads, and headed to class, had my backpack, all my books and notes. And now in my small town, when they repave a road, they don't do it properly. They throw down a bunch of tar and pebbles, and it's really actually very slippery. And my little car slid over to the side of the road on these pebbles and went up a bank and started rolling over and over again. And, of course, I thought I was going to die. And I found myself sitting in the middle of a farmer's field on a sunny spring day, lost my shoes, lost my glasses, blood everywhere. And I looked over to the beetle, and it was like a bad movie. There's just a crumbled mass of metal. I'm like, wow, how did anybody survive that? And the wheel was slowly turning. And if I could remember what was still playing on the AM radio, it might have some significance, but some classic rock sound. And um, then I look at myself and I'm a mess. Um, but I wasn't like seriously injured. And then I looked out over the farmer's field and there were all these beautiful yellow flowers blowing in the wind and just flowing so fluidly. And I realized it was a year's worth of class notes that I had taken on yellow legal paper, just blowing away. And I'm like, wow, that's beautiful. Go ahead. And, and then I wondered, like, wow, so I wonder if I'm dead or alive. And I got filled with like anxiety, like, what if I'm dead? And I'm like, well, if I'm dead, it's a pretty nice day. Nothing bad's happening. I guess I will move along and see what happens next on this new adventure. So I kind of felt okay about death. And I'm like, well, if I'm alive, that's okay too. And then I'm like, well, how am I going to know if I'm dead or alive? I thought about it and I'm like, well, if somebody stops and just ignores me, I'm dead. But if somebody talks to me and takes me to the hospital, I'm alive. And obviously, unless it's some cruel divine joke, somebody took me to the hospital and I'm alive. Every now and then I wonder, maybe it's just some grand joke. But yeah, so I felt a lot better about dying after that. Um, Another existential experiences. I won't bore you with any more stories after this. I just want to give you a variety because your discussion board is to talk about any existential experiences you might have had. Um, so the last one I can share is that every now and then, from the time I was a little kid, uh, I would be in a bar with my dad or friends or whoever as I grew up, and I'd go to the bathroom and I'd wash my hands and I'd look in the mirror and I'd look at myself, and all of a sudden it's like space and time compressed and stopped in that moment. And like I'm totally present, but like being totally present without time is really a weird experience. And so it's almost like I have this existential check-in. Oh, here I am. How am I doing? Am I like doing okay? Am I like a good person? Am I a bad person? Am I finding meaning? Am I wasting my time? What's going on? What do I need to change in my life? And after I figure that out, I need to go out and have a drink. So, all right, that's all my existential experiences. You can think of some of your own for your discussion board. Um, let's see. Uh, so there is this thing that Corey puts in, and I included it in your notes because these are the things you can talk about in therapy. These are the subjects. And he has a nice little list here. Humans have the capacity for self-awareness. I think, therefore I am. I think animals do too. I think it's so egotistical to think like humans are the only ones who experience these things. Humans possess freedom and responsibility, even a prison camp. Um, so by freedom and responsibility, they seem contradictory. But the first thing we realize is that nobody can control how we think or feel. They might be able to put us in a prison camp, but it's our choice how we think and feel, and those thoughts and feelings can then lead to our choice of actions. And so that's the freedom. I can think or feel anything I want, and I can choose to act what's within my ability. But then we realize that, wow, if I have total freedom, nobody else is responsible for me. I can't blame anybody else. And there comes the responsibility. Only I am responsible for my choices and actions. So that's where they get that phrase, with great freedom comes great responsibility. Humans strive to create our own identity and to establish meaningful relationships with others. It's that I thou relationship. Humans search for meaning, purpose, values, and goals. And I think as a therapist, one of my goals in therapy is to help people to find meaning in their lives. Not that I'm an expert, I'm on my own journey. Sometimes it's nice to walk that journey with somebody else for a little while. Anxiety is a condition of life and being human. Anxiety facilitates growth. Change usually leads to anxiety, or it's the result of anxiety. So even positive change. Think about the big positive changes, a wedding, a pregnancy, a job, all good things, but still things that kind of makes us anxious. So even good change has a little bit of anxiety to it. That's because change should equal growth. Whenever I'm happy, yeah, I could probably grow a little when I'm happy. I might read a good book or something like that. But, I'm a little hedonistic also. I'm going to bask in that good feeling. Most of my growth has taken place during struggle. Humans are aware of their own eventual death and non being, and that adds a poignancy to life. A lot of times people may lose somebody they care about, and perhaps they were young. But if we truly begin to understand the present, time loses its hold on us. And so it's not about the length of time that we live, it's about how we live during the time we have. It's a little different there. There's some notes about therapy, and one of the things I like to do is things like life mapping and things like that. Um, And then you'll notice, don't stop at my notes. I wrote the definition, well, me and my friend Jeff, we wrote the definition for existentialism um, for the ACA encyclopedia. So read that definition. It kind of summarizes a lot of what I've been talking about. It's not like a chapter, it's only a definition in an encyclopedia. All right. That's my take on existentialism. But some of you I know have had some experience in other programs with phenomenology and existentialism. Give me your 2 cents or thoughts or questions. Jessica.
So I don't know if you remember, but you actually were one of the people who conducted the interview for the program a couple months ago. And during that interview, I shared one of my favorite quotes, and it's popping back up here because we're talking about meaning of life and purpose. And those types of things, and I just wanted to reshare it because it so much applies to existentialism. And the quote goes, and I forget the author, that the meaning of life is to find your gifts, and the purpose of life is to share those gifts with others. And I very much like that quote, and I think maybe I was an existentialist for a while now.
Yeah, maybe you'll graduate from stoicism to existentialism. Just kidding.
But the logos is the fundamental ground for the ethical component of the philosophy, with the laws of nature and that kind of existentialism with bonds of nature and the predestined role, and death as well is a great motivator. So,
Death is a pretty good motivator.
mhm.
Colin.
Yeah, I have a question. I know that like a lot of people who experiment with hallucinogenics often feel like extremely existential like breakthroughs and all of these different, very existential experiences. Does that corrupt them like the influence of them, or are they only as influential as you perceive them to be, so they're as influential as just like a normal sober one?
Well, so there's all different theories about drugs, you know. And I have my own take on it. Um, I think everything on earth was placed here for a reason, but I also don't believe in synthetics. And so I've done a lot of research in different types of, because I have a degree in multicultural religious studies. So I've gone to different cultures. I've studied with shamans and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I think that one of the common components of any hallucinogenic, not just psilocybin, any hallucinogenic, it works on a part of our mind that allows us to more easily release our ego. And that makes room for existential understanding. So there's also bad trips. You can
Yeah, thank
learn
you. I
you can
appreciate that.
learn from them as well, believe it or not. But there's a whole trend in psilocybin therapy. What else? Oh yeah, do you have your hand up?
Sort of in that age group, and I was just wondering at what point does it go to existential nihilism, where you're like, oh, what's the whole point of
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's where people are at, and that's what brings us to therapy, that life is meaningless, I'm depressed. Spiritually, they might call that the dark night of the soul, when we feel totally alone and life is meaningless and, you know.
is it necessarily a negative thing to
So,
perception?
yeah, I mean, so I can only tell you personally that I had to go through a dark night of the soul, that experience of feeling totally alone and life is meaningless, in order to get to the other side, to find meaning. But I wouldn't have wanted to stay there personally. What else?
I thought it was very interesting when you were touching on the existentialism and end of life. I used to work in palliative care, um, and one of my primary roles was to be with people who didn't have families when they were passing and kind of counsel them during that point. And a lot of them had very like just profound realizations near the end of life and shared a lot of interesting stories. So it was interesting to see the connection of the existentialism you were talking about and tying that in with what I did in the past. I
Yeah.
appreciated that.
Yeah, and with all the people I've been with, nobody said, "Oh, I should have worked harder." Oh, I should have
Yeah.
made more money. It's always should have followed my dream. I should have spent more time with the people I loved.
Yeah, that's a common theme. It's like I wish I would have done this rather than like worked on making money or wishing they would have spent more time with their kids or different things like that.
So, Irene, what are some coping mechanisms or concepts in therapy that are your favorite when dealing with existential dread? Do you mind sharing your insight on the intersection between your own personal spiritual views and existentialism? Um, so, I'm like a purist. I don't think there are coping mechanisms. I don't believe there are, I'll call them gimmicks, you know? Like a coping mechanism, I don't see as a permanent fix, you know? Um, a lot of other theories use them, but, in my view, existentialism, the fix is moving through the dread to find a positive path. Yeah. I mean, it's work. I don't think there's any shortcuts. Oh, let's use this coping mechanism. No, no, there's no, it's like you have to go through the storm. You can't go around it. So you asked about my own spirituality. Um, I'm uh I'm the Presbyterian minister for First Presbyterian Church in California in my spare time. And so I just believe in finding a personal relationship with your higher being, whatever that is for you. Yeah.
I think for me, one thing that's helped is acceptance of where I am at that particular moment, whatever's happening in my life is meant to be, and that I can't control what I can't control. And for that really means the peace for
Yeah.
whatever.
So acceptance of where you are and what's happening, and that helps you find some peace. I'd take it a step further, accepting yourself where you're at. I don't really like the saying, you got to learn to love yourself. I think that's too egotistical. If I can live with myself and find some peace, that's pretty good. Somehow my wife does it. I don't know. I can't live with myself. What else?
Like so far, this is my favorite theory.
Nice.
I don't know if it's like the theorists, like their stories, like I don't know if that's what kind of like made me very interested in it. I don't know. Because I read whenever you talked about that book, I went on Amazon and read the description of it. And like his wife was pregnant and just gone.
It's sad.
His family was gone and he still was so positive. And like I struggle with being positive daily, and what's the worst thing I have to do? Deal with the public? Like it's just I don't know, something about his story really just like hit me. And this has become like one of my favorite theories so far.
So yeah, I mean, modern people find it difficult to be positive, living like kings and queens, you know. But here's the weird thing. Okay, so I mean, like my family always struggled. Like they were turning the lights off and turning the water. One week it was the lights, one week it was the water. What are they going to turn off this week? But as I became more successful, even middle class is like the top 1% in some countries. And so, um, you know, when I would go to other countries and I would take counseling students and we would work in like women's shelters and orphanages and things like that. And I spent like a while in India by myself. Um, you know, that was probably the most peace I had because I took a backpack, you know. I lived in one room with a cot and no glass on the windows. If they had electricity, I'd have a fan maybe and a light. Um, but sometimes too much of a good thing is not a good thing. It creates anxiety, and giving up everything gives you freedom and relieves anxiety. So one thing I found is that when I go to maybe another country, if people have enough to eat and they're healthy and they have shelter and a support network, they're happier than I am. Yeah, happier than people with like too much stuff. Yeah. Other questions, comments? All right. Can't wait to read your discussion boards.